Nearly half of all Americans will experience mental illness within their lifetime. Mental illnesses are schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction, and the list goes on. So, why is this such a big deal in America? And what's this have to do with this holistic health series on the microbiome? Well, guess what? When I said all disease starts in the gut, that's correct, including mental illness. Yes, including mental illness. So again, the microbiome is made up of trillions of bacterial cells, and it's mostly in the gut. And there's good bacteria and there's bad bacteria. And the bad bacteria feed off of meat, dairy, bread, and sugar. And when they dominate the microbiome, they excrete a toxic chemical known as bile. And that causes inflammation, which then triggers the epigenome, which then triggers our diseases, our predisposition towards disease. So basically, the human body is what's known as a superorganism. And that's why we need to work with the microbiome. We need to work with these bacteria. And we need to feed the good bacteria fibers, fruits, nuts, vegetables, legumes, especially onions and garlic, and cannabis, right? So we got to feed the good bacteria to empower them and to bring our bodies back to homeostasis so we can self-regulate and self-heal. So the microbiome is a big part of our self-regulation, right? So that means that the microbiome is feeding the entire body. Yeah, and there's this thing called the gut-brain axis, right? So whatever's going on in the microbiome has an effect on the gut-brain axis in the sense that it makes the barrier to the blood-brain barrier, it could make it sort of deteriorate, right? So if the microbiome is being dominated by bad bacteria and the gut-brain axis is feeding the brain through the microbiome and the blood-brain barrier is being destroyed by this inflammation, by the microbiome being dominated by the bad bacteria, then microorganisms are getting into the brain and causing inflammation. And there's this thing called the leaky gut. So there's a gut barrier and there's a blood-brain barrier. And the microbiome has a direct effect on the permeability of these barriers. So when the microbiome is out of homeostasis or out of balance and the bad bacteria is dominating it, then this bad bacteria can slip through, or the microorganisms can slip through the gut barrier and the blood-brain barrier. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about mental health. So if we want to reverse mental health problems, then we really need to focus on bringing the microbiome back to homeostasis. But that becomes very difficult because of our food system. So pesticides and herbicides and GMOs and meat and dairy and bread and sugar and basically these other things that are in processed foods, they also have a direct effect on our microbiome or our gut flora or the microbiata or the bacteria, right? So that's why this is so challenging to get people to understand this extreme paradigm shift that needs to be embraced. We really have to understand that we really need to change our diets to an ovo-vegan diet. We need to make sure we're not ingesting GMOs or herbicides or pesticides or hard drugs or alcohol or anything that destroys the bacteria in the gut. Right? Like antibiotics, which is in our animal supply because of the animal feed. So we really got to focus on all these different details. So rather than trying to go to the grocery store and pick the right foods, you basically have to cook the food yourself. And you need a raw vegan smoothie for breakfast. You need a brown rice a vegetable vegan hot lunch, and you need an egg and bean dinner, right? And those are the three things that I'm recommending. And you got to make sure they're pasture-raised organic eggs. You got to make sure it's brown organic rice, because the brown rice has the fiber and the white rice doesn't. So the white rice simply acts as sugar. And then you got to make sure it's all organic and pasture-raised. Like, it's so important. I can't even tell you how important it is. And then, of course, cannabis. It's the key thing, because what we're talking about with mental health, once we get the microbiome back to homeostasis, and once we reduce the inflammation in the brain and in the gut, and once we stop the leaky gut, then we can bring our bodies back to homeostasis. But then our brain wiring still needs to be affected. And that's basically called neuroplasticity. So we need to enhance neuroplasticity to break the calcified neural pathways that were caused by the addiction or the trauma, right? Or the depression, right? So our brain is malleable, and we can create new pathways by ingesting certain foods. And the greatest neuroplastic enhancers are mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, and cannabis. Those are the two best forms. And then when we're talking about talk therapy and PTSD, it's really good to have MDMA, or what's known as ecstasy, because the MDMA helps people talk. It's sort of a derivative of speed, and it helps people let go of their fears and talk more openly and be more transparent and vulnerable. Now, it's just a short-term methodology that we want to be using here, because basically to really affect neuroplasticity, you not only need to be doing talk therapy, and you not only need to be ingesting cannabis and doing microdosing of mushrooms, and maybe working with a therapist with MDMA. You also need to be going out in nature and doing exercise and helping other people and service, right? So there's a lot to this. But mental health is the result of the gut-brain axis, the microbiome, and the best way to do this, or fix this whole epidemic of mental health, is to completely change our paradigm in regards to the human diet. Ovo-vegan, ingest cannabis, moderate exercise, and if you're really sick, go see an osteopath and do all four. Okay? Thank you. Have a great day.